Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, preppers of all ages appropriate for watching this kind of content in your local jurisdiction. I'm Tyler, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping, and in tonight's video, we're going to talk about why the movie Titanic by Steven Spielberg is a wonderful prepper and survivalist movie. Hello, Westwind Survival, how you doing? We're going to chat about why the movie Titanic is a great movie for thinking about survival. Creative redundancy, how you doing? Good, glad you're doing all right, Wayne. Glad you're here so late to be here and chat. Creative, haven't seen you in a few days. How you doing? All right, so got a couple things to address just to everybody here and everybody rewatching. Oh, thank you, Wayne. How's my dad doing? He's doing well. That's part of what I want to address. So he is recovering. He's doing pretty well, I think. He's going to need a pacemaker. They did that today, so he's got a pacemaker now. He was moved into the step-down ward from the ICU tonight, so my mother and him are staying in the step-down ward tonight together. But you know, he went into it having a feeling that he was going to come out of it with a pacemaker. So he told us all that. He told his doctor that he wasn't going to be surprised if that was the outcome, and it's where we're at. So, but he's doing well. I believe that he's recovering well. It's scary for everybody just because there's a lot of he's really under it, but. You know, Hooples in particular has been very helpful in knowing what this is going to be like. So we're going through it well, and I think that we're doing well. So I appreciate you caring about, asking about that. So partially because of that and some of the other stuff that's going on, I'm really behind on a lot of videos, comments, and just a lot of stuff going on here. So I appreciate you all hanging in there for that. Been a pretty busy time lately. So something pretty cool came in today. Got a mail call from Hooples, and I'm going to share a little bit of this with you guys. And it's sort of funny. I have quite a bit of serendipity in my life. That is things that all come around to connect. I used to be religious. I'm not currently a super religious person in so much as organized religion or doctrine or anything like that. But I do notice things, and in my life, there are a lot of things that come around to reconnect with themselves, and I've noticed a couple of those kinds of things lately. Give me just a second here to catch up on my chat. What are you guys up to tonight? Aside from dropping into this chat. All right. Serendipity. When things sort of come around to reconnect with each other, or different things end up having to do with each other in your life that were completely separate and seem to have nothing to do with each other. Not up to much, Wayne? That's good. It's been a busy day for me, but often this late I'm not doing much. But doing researching, creating, and watching and trying to stay afloat, no pun intended. Is it pretty wet where you're at there, CR? All right. So the movie Titanic by Steven Spielberg was one that I watched when I was younger, and I've always thought that it was a great movie, and it is. It is to this day. I just rewatched it. Been having a very busy, stressful time. Late last night, I decided I had the time that I wasn't really going to be very on top of responding to comments or making a video or anything, and I had it itching in the back of my mind that I wanted to watch the movie Titanic again. Don't know why. It's just one of those things that you get in your head and it's an itch you want to scratch. Got down 35 with wind and rain. Wow, CR. Wet and 35 degrees. That's not summer right there. Took your first date to that movie, best nap you ever had. Yeah, I can understand that. And I've been at different points. It's a boring movie sometimes, but it's also, if you sort of get into it, aside from a lot of the personal drama stuff that goes on. Went out for, oh, you went out in the wet and the cold for an hour, and that's fun, CR. It's always fun to have a nice winter experience in the middle of summer. Took your first date to the movie. All right. So if you don't fall asleep during the Titanic, it can be a good movie because it actually sort of depicts the events that happened that night more or less accurately if you pretty much pick out all of the fiction that's added in, which is a lot of it. But when we're talking about the actual timeline of what occurs, it's not so far off of the truth that by watching that movie as a prepper or a survivalist, you don't get a good idea of what that situation would have been like as an individual and what you might have wanted to do to survive in it. All right. So I watched it recently just for a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of stress release, a little bit of escapism. There's plenty of other options I could have chosen, but that's what I chose. And I wrote some notes about why the Titanic movie by Steven Spielberg is a great movie for us to watch just to get some ideas. Now, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I truly do believe that it's actually a good movie. It's got a great score. It's well shot. The CGI still stands up, even though it's quite old. And I think that if you watch it and you're sort of thinking to yourself, what would it be like to be in that situation? With the benefit of knowing that this is a real situation that really happened, that you can know enough facts about to really ask yourself, what would it be like to be there myself in that place? Not only for the nostalgic 1912 technology and architecture atmosphere of it all, but also for the sheer chaos of being on a ship, an old steamliner like that, that's going down, where less than half of the people on board are going to survive, and you need to figure out how to be one of those people. It's a very interesting situation to put yourself in. And so for that reason, everything around it has always fascinated me a little bit. Aside from the fact that I watched this movie when I was young, Kate Beckinsale was, sort of a thing. And also, there were multiple video games that came out. And since I was a little bit of a PC nerd at the time, there was one game in particular which I always tried to play but could never get past, where you had to use the telegraph to try to signal for help. I might actually end up playing that game again just to see if I can get past it, because I was a little young at the time. Uncle Al is in. How you doing? Uncle Al, we're talking about the Titanic tonight. Before we get into it, here is where the serendipity comes into play. So I've been actually thinking about this for a while, and one of you guys out there is going on a cruise, which was sort of coincidental to me watching this last night. Exactly, CR. Learning from these kinds of real life events is very valuable. This is something that happened. This is actually something that happens somewhat regularly. This isn't even getting into the naval incidents of the time. The Navy at the time was using all steamliners, and for them, it's a little bit different because they're all sort of working under the contract of dying while doing their jobs. But what we're talking about with things like the Titanic and the Lusitania and different things like that are civilians, basically more or less going about their everyday lives and then entering a situation where it's life and death and not everyone's going to survive. So very interesting. Now, another thing that's interesting is the fact that Hoople's Cat EPL, for those of you who don't know, he's a wonderful channel. I think you need to go check him out. I suggest him regularly, more regularly than maybe some of you would like, but I think he's a great guy. Now, he has said before that you're not really friends with someone until you've smelled them. So you can't really be friends with someone through the onlines. And I sort of agree with that. It's a good bit of wisdom. But I think Hooples is my friend. I'll consider him that. Anyways, he had a video, the first video that I actually ever saw of his, where he was sharing that he had some condoms made for his channel. And he put one over his head, which I don't think I'll do tonight because I don't really like the smell of condom lubrication on my face. Hey, Prescott. How you doing? Prescott Caliber Club in the house. So the first video that I ever saw of Hooples was him taking one of the condoms that he had made for his channel and stretching it over his whole head. And I knew right away that a grown man who can goof around like that and also talk in a very, very serious and rational manner about survival and prepping is somebody that I wanted to be around, aside from the fact that he has a medical background. Makes him very valuable. Anyways, about to shoot 9-5. Oh, right on. Shoot a couple from me there, buddy. Ryan Jeske there at Prescott Caliber Club is one of those lucky people who has bullet trap in an indoor place, so he can just go out to his gun shop and shoot some rounds while watching YouTube. So let's all be jealous of him because he's literally shooting bullets right now. Anyways, we were talking about Hooples. So one of the first videos that Hooples that I ever saw of his was his condom video. Now, I hope that you guys, let me switch over, see if you guys are going to be able to see this at all. I asked Hooples to send me some of his official channel condoms. I don't know why he got these and why he sends them out as a promotional thing, but I mostly got these for the sake of sharing with you guys, because I don't think that I'll ever use these with a woman. Oh God, please tell me that will focus. I've had a very stressful day today, and this arrived in the mail and was waiting for me when I got home today. It's an image of Hooples with a very small pistol looking like James Bond, pointing it at the camera, and it says Hooples Cat Prepping. I'll make sure you guys get a good image of that. Anyways, I know it was partially a stress relief response, but I was on the ground cry laughing when I opened the envelope and saw those. I agree, Wayne. I don't know that I could try to be romantic with a woman and open that condom and maintain composure. Needless to say, the arrival of this letter from Hooples was much needed stress relief, and it was really great. You're good, Ryan. Now, the very interesting thing about this was that I think the woman would run away. I don't know. She might be so attracted to the suave and debonair man of mystery on the wrapper that she might completely forget about me. Never look at consummating the same again. I agree, creative. I agree. Now, what's interesting is that the RMS Titanic was featured on the stamp that Hooples put on the letter that he sent to me. And that really gave me a moment for pause, because I've been planning to watch the Titanic for a while just because it keeps tickling at the back of my brain as something that I'd like to watch again. And I just did that last night, and then today it arrived. But I'm almost positive that there's no way I even mentioned it and that he picked it up even subconsciously. So it's pure chance that on the day that I planned on doing a live stream about the Titanic, I receive a letter from Hooples, which, by the way, he either tried to send in the mail before and which failed to arrive to me because the Canadian-American mail system supposedly is very poor, or which he got so busy, which is completely understandable. And we're not going to ask which one it was, because I've actually completely failed to do a couple of my giveaway send-offs so far, because things get busy. Either way, he was going to send this to me before. He either did or didn't get around to it. But it's actually perfect that it arrived today, because I really needed it. And it arrived precisely at the perfect time to give me a much needed laugh and some joy in a really stressful day where I took care of some pretty intense stuff. So I received some Hoople's cat prophylactics. And that guy sent me a little bit of Canadian silver, because I'm sending him some British silver, presumably, and he's just a great guy. No GE foods are served in this cafeteria. Sign in Monsanto staff cafeteria in England, 1999. So, just a couple funny things that he sent to me. Stop asking questions or we'll permanently detain you. A message from the Ministry of Homeland Security. Just some funny vegan propaganda. Some face things. And some instant coffee. I think that's it. I don't think I dropped anything. Anyways, that's some really awesome mail call from Hooples. But the crown of it all is the stamp with the RMS Titanic on it, because that was the subject of today's video. Yes, creative. Sometimes it's worth more. What I wonder, does Hooples use Hooples condoms? No, don't you know that vegans are completely sterile? It's a sad fact. Don't know what to tell you. All right. So we've covered most of it. Let's talk about why the movie Titanic by Steven Spielberg is a wonderful survival movie. Yes, creative redundancy. Coffee is the elixir of life. Vegans can't kill their sperm. No, they can kill their sperm. It's not the fact that they've reproduced. It's the fact that the vegan gene pops up randomly throughout the population. There's nothing we can do about it. All right. One of the reasons that the movie Titanic is great is the quote that inside I was screaming. And then it goes right into that horn blaring. It's just a great scene. In fact, throughout the movie, there are just wonderfully shot scenes. Actually, one of my favorite parts of the movie Titanic is the recurring dialogue and things that keep getting a reprisal. Multiple characters say things, and then their last line is sort of referring back to an earlier line. I think that that's a good mark of a good book or a good movie, where they appreciate the things that have been said by characters in the past and sort of refer back to them. It sort of gives you an appreciation for the fact that they're also following along with the storyline with you. All right. So, in all seriousness, why the Titanic is a great movie is you're really looking at a situation where there are, okay, for facts, 2,200 people on a steamliner. Year was 1912. The ship was the largest ship that had been fielded for passengers at the time. It was advertised as unsinkable, but I think that anybody who really knew what they were talking about knew that it could sink. The ship was made of steel and mostly relied on buoyancy and watertight compartments to stay afloat. So as we all know, and I think as we all sort of take for granted, the ship sank. I think that some of us who just sort of grew up with it, I mean, we all grew up with this knowledge. I think we take it for granted that it's just maybe a bad idea to get on a steamliner in the early 1910s. But back then, it was something that you weren't necessarily taking for granted. It was state-of-the-art technology. It was like accepting that planes were safe to fly on. Although I'm pretty sure steamliners did not have the safety rating that modern aircraft do. It was actually pretty common for them to sink, but people back then accepted those kinds of risks. Any ship can sink if enough water gets inside too. And yes, it was a single hole. All right, we're getting some ship knowledge in there. Yeah. So yes, if water gets inside, you've got trouble. We all know that the Titanic was not unsinkable, but we all still get on planes, and more importantly, we all still drive. We all know very well that driving is more deadly, probably, than being on the Titanic. That might not actually be true because the Titanic killed like 2/3 of the people that got onto it. But riding a steamliner, I don't know the statistics on that, but my point is we know that getting into a car has a pretty decent chance of getting us killed in a way that we have no control over. And yet we do it, even though there are alternatives that we could perhaps do at an inconvenience that would be safer for our lives. The point is, let's throw out the idea that, of course, we would never get onto the Titanic. Let's say that we considered the opportunity to get onto the Titanic to be luck. Which brings us to my first point. Don't always trust good luck. Now, right at the beginning of the movie, we see the character, Jack, and his friend winning a game of cards and getting onto the Titanic through luck. That wasn't very good luck. They would probably still be alive if they had stayed in England. Now, we also get to the other point. Be good at cards. You never do know when a lot of really important things could hinge on a game of cards. So knowing how to play a few popular games of cards could be beneficial, not necessarily in a lot of survival situations, but in a few. But importantly, have good luck, but also don't necessarily trust luck because it can really come back to bite you. Guns are a saver. Don't give spoilers, Uncle Al. That's like hour 3 of this movie. Yes, it's longer than a 3-hour movie, for those of you who haven't seen it. All right. Gambling skills. Having luck. Don't always trust your luck. Having good BS skills. Being able to bowl your way through situations. Right at the beginning of the movie, we see Jack and his friend trying to get on the ship. They say they've already been through the inspection queue, and besides, they don't have any lice. They're Americans. Sometimes being able to just bluster your way through a situation is pretty important. Being able to know how to speak, how to comport yourself so that the person just sort of assumes that you know what you're talking about could be pretty helpful. You don't always necessarily want to be beholden to the other person. Sometimes approaching them, knowing what you're about, and addressing them properly can really help you get through a situation without any trouble. So something that I really like about the movie that I wanted to point out is just the attention to the 1912's technology, architecture, and all that stuff. Really gets you into the situation, really gets you appreciating that it was a real place, a real time. There were real people in those corridors inside the walls of that ship, living a life, going about a cruise that they felt was a high point in their life, and then which descended into chaos. So the movie still stands as a really good immersion into that environment. And I think as preppers and survivalists, we put ourselves into that environment. Just imagine ourselves being a regular early 1900s person in what we felt was a state-of-the-art cruise ship and just having it basically crumble around us, I think is a good exercise to look at surviving in a situation that is not necessarily like the almost storybook-like situations that we tend to put ourselves in when we're talking about EMPs, things like that. Next important fact that I learned from this movie that I didn't realize when I was younger. Women can get you killed. Let's face it. I mean, sexism aside, pretty rich girls can get a man killed just by being committed to them. Rip dudes. Be able to mingle with society. It's important to be able to sort of mingle with whoever you find yourself around. Some people are very sheltered in so much as they don't interact with a lot of different kinds of people. I think it's important to be able to interact with people from all walks of life, whether that's people who are in poverty and people who are wealthy, people who are middle class, people who are blue collar workers. I'm not saying be a chameleon or be deceitful, but I think that it's important to be able to interact with anybody that you're around and make them feel personable with you. I don't think that you necessarily want to be the kind of person who's alien to different types of people. A lot of different situations, it's important to be able to blend in, sort of be the gray man, but not necessarily in a way that you're different, but in the way that people identify with you. Yeah, no, it's true, creative. This is not something that is isolated to the past. Ships, cruise ships, all kinds of things do still capsize, run aground, and it's not always just hop, skip, and a jump right to shore. All right, so be able to mingle with all people from all walks of life. So getting a little bit, hopping ahead into the more serious situations. I think that's important when we're looking at this, before we even get into the actual chaos of the ship sinking or things like that, to ask yourself how much you're willing to do in an emergency situation to help others, and when it becomes a situation of looking out for your best interests. I think it's important to do everything that you can to help others, but not to the extent that you're starting to sacrifice your own chances for survival. But that's really getting into this kind of very cut and dry situation. So we'll come back to that later. But what Westwind pointed out, Wayne, is very accurate and completely separate from our concern with the Titanic. Today, you're probably more concerned with getting some kind of biological hazard, like a gastrointestinal problem from a cruise ship, than anything else. For whatever reason, they do have a higher tendency of people getting sick on them than just the same trafficked restaurant off of a cruise ship. And that's just because you just have everybody interacting with each other. It's pretty much a ripe environment for having biological concerns. So I would actually, that's the main reason that I would stay away from a cruise ship nowadays, far from running into an iceberg and everybody dying. Because let's be honest, they could probably fly helicopters out there faster than the other cruise ships arrived at the scene of the Titanic nowadays. Yeah, I bet gastro is just awful. All right. So we're mostly going to ignore most of the actual movie, the drama, the interpersonal stuff that goes on. Some of this is tongue-in-cheek, some of this is serious, and we're getting into a little bit of the more serious stuff. So I don't know if you guys are drinking. I'm drinking a little bit of cider here, hard cider. So I'm going to top off before we get into the meat of the sinking here. Bud Light. Very good. There's a place called Growler Guys around here. Now, I'm really not generally much of a drinker, but when I do things, I like to be cheaper about it, and that's a pretty cheap way to get some hard cider. All right, so getting serious about the sinking of the Titanic. 2,200 people, more or less, on board. Some jailhouse stuff, like bootleg liquor or beer or something like that. Interesting. I'd like to just make some homemade apple cider, just learn how to do it from apples. I agree. No, it'd be very home bootlegging hooch. I'm guessing that Prescott's talking about like taking a little cup of apple juice and figuring out how to ferment it. Anyways, yeah, no, alcohol skills would probably be pretty valuable. Home brewing is pretty popular around here. Toilet wine. I don't want to know some of the stuff that they convince themselves is alcohol in prison. I don't want it. Yeah, I believe that, Wayne. That's why I like the idea of cider. I think that maybe that's a little safer than moonshine. You just let the apples go a little bit, and then there you go. I do like whiskey, though. Might be worth risking a little bit of blindness. I don't know. Hard to say. Anyways, getting off topic. We'll come back to that. You guys run your stuff in the chat. I'm going to run through my list here. 2,200 people on board the Titanic. Runs into the iceberg in the middle of the night. So we're going to run this exercise assuming that we're one of the regular people riding the ship, don't have any idea what's going on. Now, in the movie, the main characters get a little bit of a hint to the fact that there are less than half as many lifeboats on board as should be for how many people there are. Uncle Al knows a real prison cider. I do like whiskey, though. I like whiskey and cider. I'm sort of tempted to mix them. What do you guys think? Give me your comments down below. What would you think about a cider with a whiskey bomb? Is that a thing? All right. So you guys can, yes, creative. You can run this with a dual awareness here. If I do that, you'll take a shot of Fireball. Sounds like a recipe for a hangover. Applejack. All right. Yeah, Uncle Al, that sounds like an Applejack. If I was using Jack, but I'm using Knob Creek and Ace Cider, what would that be? A Cider Creek? Oh, Wayne, but I don't smoke anymore. But it does sound extremely good. I already had some bourbon earlier. But that is good. Creek cider. All right. That is good. You guys should try that. Good bourbon with a cider to follow it up. That is good. You can't argue with that. All right. So this is a serious situation, guys. Let's put aside all of the French 75, Uncle Al? I'll look into it. Put aside all the assumptions that we would not find ourselves on the Titanic. Let's say that for whatever reason, we're a person in 1912 and we find ourselves on the RMS Titanic. There's a sudden shudder. Let's say we're asleep. Let's say we're out on the deck kissing our newfound lover. Either which way, we wake up and we realize that the ship has been struck. Now, that would make us one of the lucky few, because a lot of the people did not have the benefit of realizing what was going on until very late in the situation. And normalcy bias, which is the fact that most people, and this is something that we need to watch ourselves for because we will be susceptible to this, most people have the tendency to assume that things are not as bad as they actually are in an emergency situation. There's a natural tendency for most people who are not paranoid to try to convince themselves that things are better than they are when they're not as good as they are. Now, there are multiple reasons for this, but the point is that in a lot of different emergency situations, everybody around you may be acting like everything is okay when it is not. This is something that led to a lot of the deaths during the sinking of the Titanic. So we find ourselves on a ship that has been struck by an iceberg and it is stopped in the water and is quickly taking on water. Now, in an emergency situation, when you find that officials are cautioning or offering warnings, I think that it's best to not only take their warnings, but to begin to be proactive about things and not necessarily only trust in their advice or their directions. Now, something that the movie points out, and which I believe is true to real life, is that many of the people in steerage, that is third class, second class, anything that was not basically the rich people, were subjected to being trapped below decks, and this is what caused a lot of their deaths. Now, if your life is on the line, there are no social boundaries that I would follow personally myself. I'm not going to allow myself or my family to die just because somebody has kept us in line. Now, this is something that happened on the Titanic while it was sinking. Many people continued to conform to social norms, even as the water was coming up around their ankles. Something that the movie points out is people banding together behind the main characters to use wooden benches to ram through gates and things like this. That's the kind of thing that you're going to need to do if you find yourself in this kind of situation. Do not allow yourself to just become somebody who sits back in a line waiting for things to change when life and death is on the line. And I think it's important to recognize that very early on and not succumb to the normalcy bias that a lot of people will find themselves succumbing to. Now, these kinds of real life situations are extremely valuable because this is something that really did happen, and a lot of people really did just stand around. They went back inside while the ship was sinking, while they saw that it was listing. They went back in and had drinks because they didn't believe that it was as serious as it was, and they ended up dying because of it. So it's very important to realize that in a lot of emergency situations, simply acting on what others are doing around you as a herd mentality very well could get you killed. So from the moment of impact, in this case, there's a ticking clock that starts. And that's something that's sort of unique to this situation. So it makes it sort of interesting to look at because, you have that moment where, let's say you recognize that the ship is sinking from that moment. Let's say, like in the movie, that you overhear the crew talking about something which indicates that the ship has failed in some way. You now have the decision to be able to try to act in a way that saves your life. Now, in the movie, many of the main characters also have the awareness of the fact that less than half the people that are on the ship are going to survive the night. Now, I think it's important to ask yourself morally if you're ready to do what it takes to survive, knowing that by doing so, you may well be pushing out the chances of somebody else, perhaps a woman or a child, surviving. I think that many of us like to consider ourselves to be moral people, and I think that many of us are moral people. And I do wonder how many of us are doing this for the sake of surviving at all costs, and how many of us are doing this as an exercise in trying to survive for the sake of some cause. And in this situation is very interesting because there are multiple opportunities throughout the movie for different characters to help the innocent, like women and children, and some do it, and some do it for selfish reasons. And I think it's very interesting to ask yourself a few different questions, like, would you sacrifice your place in a limited pool of survivors, and who would you do that for? Would you give up your spot on a lifeboat for a child or for a woman? And what would it take for you to choose not to do that for someone? If you are stuck with a family member who is immobile enough or unwilling enough to do what it takes to survive, will you stay and die with them out of loyalty to your family, or would you leave them behind because they've chosen or are unable to survive in a situation that otherwise means certain death? This movie is pretty dramatic in ways that is very interesting because it gets you to ask yourself these questions if you're really thinking about it this way. Would you leave behind a family member who was too slow to survive in a situation where being that slow absolutely means certain death? Would you give up your spot on a lifeboat for a child if there simply were not enough spaces for everybody to survive, and if it definitely meant your death? Very interesting questions to ask yourself. And movies like this that are extremely entertaining for escapism reasons and for getting you to ask these in-depth questions, or at least to confront them, I think are pretty valuable. All right, so in these situations, I think it's very important to both act fast and decisively, but also to be very calm and cautious. Being rash and hasty is pretty much always worse than being much slower. I think it's important to always assess all the risks involved in your situation and in your choices before acting. In this kind of situation, there are a lot of things that you could do to make your situation worse. For instance, if you overheard that the ship was sinking and you very quickly tried and went to go steal a lifeboat and row away with it, I think you'd find yourself locked up in the brig about an hour or two before anybody else was even boarding the lifeboats, because it took a long time for anybody to respond to this situation. It's true, CR. No matter what we do, we may throw things out because of stress and emotions, but I think it's important to always at least try to condition yourself as much as you can to try to react the way that you want to in those situations. Yeah, and you may well be shot by officials, which is something that we'll get to later on, Uncle Al. So now that we're talking about the ship sinking, let's get back to the do what you can to help others, but don't sacrifice your life necessarily just for altruism. There's a scene pretty early on, as soon as the iceberg hits the ship, where we see down in the engine boiler rooms a bunch of guys trying to run and get out through the watertight bulkhead doors as they're closed as an emergency means to save the ship. Now, there's a guy who's waving everybody else through, but right as the door gets close to closing, he dives through himself, leaving somebody else to be stuck. Now, this guy was helping everybody else and waving them through at risk to himself, but as soon as he recognized that to wait any longer would mean to be stuck himself, he took the opportunity to save himself, even if it means leaving somebody else behind. He made the decision to save his own life because he realized that maybe that other guy couldn't even make it through himself. There was no point in staying just to be there with him. Or perhaps that it was either him or the other guy, and deciding that it was going to be him. Now, I would like to open up the debate as to whether or not it is moral or not to choose yourself over somebody else, and who you think is equal to any individual when it comes to sacrificing a life or saving a life. But I do think it is a very valuable and interesting question to ask yourself. If you find yourself in a situation where truly only you or somebody just like you can survive, who would you choose? Would you sacrifice yourself? Or would you side with your survival instinct to always make it through and choose to survive for yourself? There's a few different points in this movie that sort of get you to ask yourself that question, if that's what you're looking at as you watch this, which I think as preppers and survivalists, we should do. Be good with directions. There are multiple points in this movie where Rose or different characters are given a long list of directions to travel through the ship, and it would be very difficult to do what they do, just generally speaking, let alone during a very hectic and chaotic situation. So having the means to be able to memorize a long list of directions is pretty helpful. There are multiple mental exercises that you can do, and it might be something that would be pretty interesting for future videos, to have mnemonic devices, that is, little memory tricks that help you to remember things, because in a few different situations, we might find ourselves needing to file a bunch of information that is absolutely vital to survival, and needing a few different tricks to be able to do it and access that information later without losing it. Now, a little side note there is one of the very common tricks that I've heard that geniuses use to file information is by remembering it as locations. Now, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, but what I have heard is that many people have a sort of mental house where within a certain physical layout of a building, they store different bits of information in different rooms, because the brain remembers locations differently than actual data. So by placing data in different places, you're able to access it using the physical memory of your brain, rather than just trying to log different bits of information in different places and then simply losing it. Such an interesting thing to think about. In such a situation, you can't save everyone, and closing the hatch means survival of the crew. Survival is not right or wrong, it simply is what it is. I agree with that. I like to think that in a few different situations, there are certain people who I would choose over survival, but I do agree that when it comes to something like closing the hatches and stuff like that, it's not necessarily a matter of morality. It is simply a matter of mathematics. And that is a point that I had marked here, completely aside from the actual individual man who's trying to wave people through the doors, is Mr. Murdoch, the character who actually flips the switch that causes the closing of the bulkhead doors. When you're on a steamliner like that and you close the bulkhead doors during a sinking, you are directly causing the deaths of people who are stuck in those rooms that are flooding, where the water is hitting coal boilers and steaming out the room. You know that you are condemning men to their deaths. That is a very weighty decision, but it is one which men are trained to do and which men have done. And I think that is something that bears consideration as preppers and survivalists. Are you ready to make decisions that will actually and literally directly doom people to their deaths for the sake of other people? We're talking about very serious situations here, and in some of these situations, it will be necessary to doom people that you know and care about to their deaths for the sake of others to survive. And we can talk about gear and all these other things all we want, but I think it's important to also ask ourselves, are we ready to make those serious decisions? Because you can just flip a switch and doom people to their deaths, but it's something that you'll have to live with if you live long enough to live with it. Interesting. That's very valuable information and skills to have, Wayne. I think that that's something that a lot of people don't appreciate. We tend to think about things in a sort of storybook fashion, a linear storyline way where we will do this, we'll do this next, things like that. I don't think we often ask ourselves what we would do if we were put in a situation where 2,000 people on a ship had their lives in our hands, where we were forced to sacrifice some of them for the sake of the many, or things like that. Damage control is a very realistic and down-to-earth way to look at these kinds of things, and I think it's something that we need to inject into our considerations. Exactly. If you don't save the ship, everyone dies. Those kinds of very nasty decisions are the kinds that people face in these emergency situations. And it's actually something that I really appreciate this movie for, because at various points throughout this movie, Steven Spielberg makes a point to point out the people who are aware of the gravity of the situation. The ship's architect, Mr. Andrews, the captain, various people who fully appreciate the fact that half of these people will be dead in just a few hours. They walk around in a sort of surreal state, watching all these people, failing to help them, knowing that there's no helping them. And this is the kind of thing that you would face in an emergency situation. Some people will completely disconnect. Some people will fail to recognize the situation because of normalcy bias, and other people will fail to act properly. Now, one of the things that truly did happen the night of the sinking of the Titanic was that most of the lifeboats were less than half full. They were rated for 70 people and probably could have held more, but many of them held less than 20. Many of them, besides those, held less than 35. Out of the 2,200 people, less than 800 were pulled from the water, if I remember correctly. This is just abysmal compared to what could have been done to save some of these people. Now, under these conditions, there is a lot that a determined person could have done to stay alive. I believe that during the early stages of the sinking, a person who dove off of the ship and swam out to the lifeboats probably would have been pulled aboard before there was much concern about swamping due to overcrowding. Many of the lifeboats left lightly loaded very early in the sinking, an hour or two before things became desperate for many of the people. Exactly, Uncle Al. A lot of rich class first people who were out on the decks smoking cigars were simply the ones who ended up on the boats, drinking from flasks, acting like it was sort of a summer party of quite a bit of inconvenience, until everybody realized that it was a life and death situation, by which point most of the lifeboats were too far away and unwilling to come back and help anybody for fear of being swamped. So after the early stages of the situation, if you weren't on a lifeboat, you were pretty much doomed. So let's get into some of my other notes. Be good with directions. Be good with an axe. Now, I don't necessarily think that you'll find yourself in a situation where somebody's handcuffed to a pipe, but I think that being good with an axe, being able to aim well with an axe, is probably pretty helpful in a lot of situations. I think it's a skill that most preppers and survivalists should have. Why the Navy does so much cross-training? Firefighting school. Yeah, I agree. Yes, the freezing water, Uncle Al, is something that I mean to get to. Is the mostly the determination that it takes to keep jumping into cold water for survival purposes. Throughout the movie, people have to keep getting out of water, getting into water. The ocean's very cold in the very middle of the sea. Icebergs are below freezing. Most of the ocean is below freezing and only stays liquid through the presence of salt. Exactly, Wayne. When you're on a ship, nobody's coming to save you. The night of the sinking of the Titanic, when they sent out their first distress call, the nearest ship was 4 hours away. And that was 2 hours past when they expected the ship to be in the water, which means that anybody who was in the water had to survive 2 hours before any help would come. And almost none of them did. So let's address the most serious part, the most serious hang-up in all of the Steven Spielberg adaptation of the movie Titanic. The door. Now, I know that the predominant opinion is that Jack could have been on the door with Rose, and I disagree. If Jack had been on the door, they both would have died. It's not a matter of surface area, but a matter of buoyancy. You see, while clearly they both would have been on the door and had plenty of surface area, the movie made it very clear that if Jack had been on the door with Rose, there would not have been enough buoyancy for them both to be up out of the water, which is what is necessary for them not to have frozen to death. Therefore, it is very clear that Jack had to be off of the door for Rose to survive. However, I do believe that over the course of the night, Jack could have gathered dead bodies and other bits of debris in order to basically form a survival raft for them both to have survived. So while I don't believe that it's necessarily Rose's fault for not getting Jack onto the door to survive, I do believe that Jack could have survived by gathering dead people in life vests, other bits of wood, and forming a little bit of a raft to survive on. So I'm sorry. The door, while large enough for them both to be on, would not have supported them both out of the water to survive. But I think that it's important to note that at some point during the course of this movie, Jack decided to die. Because rather than doing other things to try to survive, he just sort of sat there in the cold water and accepted that he was going to die and she was going to live without him. So I think that it's important to ask ourselves when that point is for ourselves. Because I don't necessarily think that it's wrong to choose a good death. There are multiple points during this movie where characters choose to die their own way. There's a mother who sits there and tells childhood stories to her children while they're laying in bed. There's a man who chooses to sit there and drink brandy while the water rushes in. There's an old couple who lays there and holds each other as their room fills with water. Now, there are plenty of situations that we're simply not going to be able to survive. Plenty of us are going to find ourselves facing a situation where we know we're going to die if these things really happen. And I think that's important to ask yourself what you will do to die well, and not just what are you going to do to try to survive. All right. Guns play a place in survival. Uncle Al pointed this out earlier, and I think it's important to point out. Sometimes it's just good to be able to pull out a gun. Happens a couple times in this movie. There are a couple of points where officials pull out guns to try to control the crowd, including bluffing with an empty gun. I think it's important to be able to keep your calm, keep a cool head. One of the characters in this movie, like I said, pulls out a gun, keeps the crowd at bay, and then turns around and reloads it. So guns can be pretty valuable in survival situations. Now, I also made note of the fact that bribery can also be pretty valuable There's a couple points where one of the main characters uses money to try to survive. Doesn't end up working quite the way that he wants, but I think that it's important to remember that money of some form or another could be pretty valuable in a few different survival situations. Life vest under the door. Sometimes you just gotta punch people. There are multiple points in this movie where somebody just earns a good punch to the face and they get it. And if you can, during a survival situation, punch that guy. So yes, keep a level head no matter what, no matter how fast and how full of determination you need to act. Always keep a level head and make your decisions using rational reasoning at every step of the way. So be careful of other people's panic. Now, at one point in this movie, Mr. Murdoch, who's basically one of the ship officials, he sort of gets a little trigger happy and ends up shooting a couple people who aren't really a threat, and he ends up killing himself over the guilt over this. But looking from the perspective of the other people, it's pretty important to be very careful of other people's panic. Mr. Murdoch is someone who's supposed to be working for the good of everybody. He ends up killing a couple of the people that he's supposed to be helping. So for ourselves as people in the crowd, we definitely want to be careful not to necessarily be the one who can get pushed into somebody with a gun, getting ourselves killed. It's important to always watch out for ourselves and not necessarily feed into the situation to our own detriment. Chief Purser. Uncle Al knows what he's talking about. So at multiple points through my notes, I have noted the normalcy bias. Pretty much throughout this movie, it depicts very accurately the fact that in real life, many people return to their rooms, return to dance halls, return to dining rooms, because they simply did not believe that the situation was as bad as it was. I think that it's very important to appreciate this. The normalcy bias and the cognitive dissonance of everybody around you is not something that you can trust. In a lot of different emergency situations, you need to be acting for yourself and not informing your opinion on the actions of those around you. Because in situations like this, and very real situations that we have for evidence about how people act in emergencies, we see that many of the people try to convince themselves that things are normal and okay until well past when they should have been acting as though things were not okay. I think that's one of the main things that we can appreciate from this situation and from this movie, from this event that happened in real life, is that we cannot appreciate when other people are acting like things are okay when we should know that they are not. Because in the case of the Titanic, more than half of the people on board that ship died when more than half of them should survived, simply because many of the officials on the ship panicked and acted hastily, and because many of the passengers did not appreciate the situation and act in their own best interests. So that pretty much covers a lot of my notes. More or less, I believe that if you find yourself on a steamliner like the RMS Titanic, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is to act calmly and decisively as quickly as you can, but not necessarily in a hasty or rash fashion. I think that it's very important to gauge all of the risks in front of you and to behave calmly and in a step-by-step kind of way to ensure that you're one of the people who ends up on the surviving side of this. We face ourselves with a situation where more than half of the people are not going to survive, where only luck and timing will make you one of the people who will survive, and perhaps a little bit of ruthlessness gets ourselves to ask ourselves, what will we do in a situation like that? if we know that it's us or the person in front of us? What would we do if we found ourselves on a ship in the middle of the ocean that very quickly would be gone? Anyways, I hope that that was interesting. Hope that any of you guys who are listening along later on put some of your comments down below. A little bit of an off the top of my head kind of live stream tonight. Probably hang out for a few minutes here just to chat with those of you who are here with me tonight. Other than that, it's been a pretty long day, so I think I might call it good pretty soon. Anyways, for those of you who are here tonight, what are you guys up to, and what would you guys like to see addressed here in future videos? Thanks, Creative. Thank you. Definitely off the top of my head, I'm definitely at the tail end of the candle burning here, so I hope that I was sort of accurate. I hope it was sort of interesting. San Diego. That sounds like an ordeal from where I'm sitting right now. I would not like the idea of going into San Diego tomorrow, but good luck with that, Wayne. Oh, the book, Selko. Yes. All right. I'm a little bit behind on those videos, Uncle Al, but I'm making a note right now to catch up on that and maybe make note of Selko, maybe get that for myself. Too many damn people. Yes. The cities always have too many damn people. Spokane has too many damn people for me. So that gives you a good idea of how many people is too many damn people. Less than 1 million. Yeah, good luck with that, Wayne. I don't like the idea of I don't like passing through Seattle. I've been to LA and it was like just constant white noise in the back of my head. I'm not meant for it. I hear you, Wayne. Just in the past few weeks, my gym and diet has suffered. My visiting the gym and my diet has suffered just from the general intrigue going on in my life, in all aspects of my life. Yep, Uncle L, living in the boondocks is a good place to be. I agree, absolutely. Well, I find it pretty fascinating that Hoople sent me that stuff just on the day that I really could have used the laugh, and that he sent it using a Titanic sticker on the very day that I meant to do this little live stream concerning why the movie Titanic is a valuable survival lesson. I find it pretty tickling whenever that kind of stuff comes around to mean something more in the future. Wow, Cloud, good job. It is, yeah. The actual thumbnail for this video is a JPEG of the same thing. Yeah, it was pretty crazy because I literally all day long I meant to do this live stream with this theme, and I get home and there's a letter sitting on the floor waiting for me, and I look at it and I see that there's an old steam liner on it, and I just sort of get this chill over me thinking it's the Titanic. And as I look closer, indeed it is. Yeah, really blew my mind. Anyways, I think I'm going to get going, guys. Definitely have a probably long day going again tomorrow. But I really just wanted to get out there, see who popped in. I'm really glad that you guys dropped into chat. Glad that we got this little live stream going here. Appreciate you guys for being here. But I definitely think that I need to hit the sack. Thank you, Creative. Definitely, everybody take care and create something awesome, whatever it is. Whether it's just your regular old day, some videos, or whatever. Wayne over at Westwind Survival has a challenge going right now concerning making some food out of your preps. It doesn't necessarily need to be a month-long thing. But if you guys have a meal that you like to make every now and then out of things that you prep, go ahead and either share it with a video or with some pictures to one of us so that we can get it out to other folks, get them knowing some recipes that other people like to use to cook some food out of things that they prep. I think it's really important to prep things that you eat on a daily basis, both so that you're helping yourself rotate them, and so that when you end up eating them in a survival situation, it's not a jarring switch from your everyday routine, but actually something comforting that you can sort of fall back on, knowing, for instance, like I do, that every morning I like to eat my instant oatmeal. And in most survival situations, I'm going to get to keep doing that and have that routine to back me up. So check that out. Drink some water. Thanks, Wayne. I got my water going here. I think I'll be okay. All right. Thanks, guys, for dropping in. Thanks for everybody who's rewatching later and stuck in this far. Hope you guys all have a good night tonight. Again, appreciate you for being here. Everybody stay safe.